On a frozen mountain road in Montana, a former Navy SEAL slowed his truck when his German Shepherd suddenly froze in place. Through the blowing snow, he saw something that made his chest tighten. Two grown women walking into a blizzard, an elderly mother barely standing her daughter, holding her upright, and a tiny German Shepherd puppy shaking in her arms. They weren't waving for help. They weren't asking for anything. They were just moving forward as if stopping was no longer an option. When the SEAL stepped out and asked one quiet question, he had no idea that choice would pull him into a past of violence, a family with nowhere to go, and a decision that would change who finally walked away and who stayed. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Winter pressed hard against the mountains of western Montana, a white silence broken only by wind and the narrow road cutting through the forest. Daniel Walker drove with both hands steady on the wheel, his old pickup pushing through snow that swallowed the edges of the asphalt and erased any sense of direction beyond the next few yards. He was 45 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, his build still solid despite years removed from active service. A thick, dark brown leather jacket creaked slightly when he shifted, worn smooth at the elbows and seams by age and weather. Beneath it, a red and navy flannel hugged his frame, tucked into faded, silver-worn jeans. A gray wool scarf was wrapped once around his neck, the ends tucked in against the cold. His beard was trimmed short but uneven in places, dark with streaks of gray that had arrived quietly over the past decade. His face was angular, marked by a strong jaw and deep-set eyes that rarely relaxed eyes shaped by years of watching horizons for threats that never announced themselves. Daniel told himself this drive was practical, nothing more. His uncle's cabin sat deeper in the mountains, empty since the man's death. Paperwork had arrived with legal language stripped of sentiment deadlines underlined in ink that felt heavier than it should. Sign, secure the property, lock the door, and leave. He had rehearsed that plan in his head for weeks, because thinking about anything else meant remembering winters long past, a porch light glowing through snowfall, and a man who had taught him how to split wood and keep his word without ever raising his voice. Beside him sat Max. The German Shepherd was nearly 8 years old now, black and tan, with a thick winter coat dusted lightly with snow from earlier stops. His posture was upright, but relaxed, the kind of stillness that came from discipline rather than fatigue. Max had served with Daniel overseas, trained to read the world before it spoke. His amber eyes tracked the tree line through the windshield, his breathing slow and even ears angled just enough to catch changes in the wind. He was not restless. He never was. Daniel was halfway through a familiar stretch of road when Max's body changed. It wasn't sudden, not a jolt or a sound. The dog's spine straightened, muscles tightening beneath his fur ears, snapping fully upright. Daniel felt it before he consciously registered it, the same way he used to sense danger before it revealed itself. His foot eased off the accelerator. Snow crunched louder beneath the tires as the truck slowed. "What is it, buddy?" Daniel murmured, his voice low, almost instinctive. Max leaned forward slightly, nose lifting as if testing the air. Human scent, close and wrong for a place this empty. Daniel's eyes narrowed, cutting through the curtain of falling snow. The road bent ahead, the forest opening just enough to reveal movement where there should have been none. Two figures emerged from the white. Two women walking. Even from a distance, Daniel could tell they were struggling. The older woman, Margaret, looked to be in her early 70s, small-framed and stooped, her posture bent by age and cold. Her hair, once likely a soft gray, was now a tangled silver, uncovered and catching snowflakes that clung to it without melting. Her skin was pale and thin, stretched tight over sharp cheekbones, her face lined not harshly but with the slow wear of time and endurance. Each step she took seemed measured, deliberate, as if balance itself required concentration. The younger woman, Claire, walked close at her side, one arm wrapped firmly around the older woman's shoulders. Claire was 28, tall but too thin, her build narrow from exhaustion rather than nature. Her dark brown hair was pulled back into a low, uneven tie, strands loose around her face and stiff with frost. Her skin was light, and wind-burned cheeks flushed raw from cold, her lips cracked despite being pressed tight in determination. Her eyes were sharp and alert, constantly scanning the road ahead and the forest beside them, the look of someone used to anticipating trouble rather than waiting for help. She carried herself with a tense strength, the kind born from necessity rather than confidence. Cradled against Margaret's chest was a small bundle wrapped in a thin, worn blanket. As the truck slowed further, Daniel could see the shape beneath the fabric. A German shepherd puppy no more than a few weeks old. Its fur was black and tan, but dulled by dampness ribs faintly visible beneath the coat. The puppy trembled, its tiny body shaking with shallow breaths, its head tucked instinctively toward what little warmth Margaret's body could offer. They did not wave. They did not look towards the truck with hope or fear. They simply kept walking step after step as if stopping was no longer an option available to them. Daniel felt the familiar internal conflict rise sharp and immediate. Every lesson he had learned the hard way pressed forward at once. Unknown civilians, isolated road, fading light. Stopping could turn compassion into liability faster than most people realized. He should keep driving. The thought came quickly efficient and practiced. Then Margaret faltered just slightly, her foot slipping before Claire tightened her grip and steadied her. The motion was small, but it struck deeper than Daniel expected. An image surfaced without permission. His uncle years ago standing at the edge of the porch during a winter storm, snow gathering on his shoulders as he waited for Daniel to come back down the road. No one should be left outside when the cold decides to stay. Daniel exhaled slowly and guided the truck onto the shoulder. The engine idled a low vibration beneath his boots. For a moment he stayed where he was, hands still on the wheel, watching the figures ahead. Claire noticed the truck then. Her body stiffened, protective instinct, flaring her arm, tightening around Margaret. Margaret only clutched the puppy closer, her chin lowering, as if bracing against another blow the world might deliver. Daniel opened the door. Cold rushed in immediately, biting through layers with sharp intent. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped down. Max followed without command, moving to Daniel's side, with controlled ease, his body loose but ready. Daniel closed the door behind him and took a few slow steps forward, stopping well short of the women to give space. "What's going on out here?" he asked, his voice steady, carrying just enough to cut through the wind. "You can't be walking in this." Claire studied him for a heartbeat too long, weighing risk against need. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, but firm. "We can't go back." Daniel looked from her to Margaret, then to the puppy shaking in the blanket. He said nothing. He simply reached back, opened the passenger door of the truck, and waited. Max stepped forward, then sitting down gently in the snow in front of the puppy head, lowered eyes calm. The puppy whimpered once, then went still. The storm closed in around them, and the road behind the truck disappeared completely. Snow thinned as the road dropped toward a cluster of lights tucked against the mountain, the storm loosening its grip just enough to reveal a small clinic crouched beneath pine shadows. Daniel Walker guided the truck into the gravel lot, and cut the engine, the sudden quiet ringing in his ears, the way it always did when tension released all at once. Cold still pressed in, sharp and purposeful, but the building ahead glowed with a single buzzing light above the door. Claire helped Margaret down from the seat, her arm firm around her mother's narrow shoulders, careful not to jostle the small bundle pressed to Margaret's chest. Margaret's hands trembled, despite the blanket, her fingers thin and veined knuckles pale where she clutched the puppy. Max jumped down, last posture, steady head, high eyes, scanning the perimeter with the practiced calm of a dog who understood thresholds and danger. Inside, the air smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. The warmth hit first, then the brightness. A nurse appeared from behind the counter almost immediately. Her name badge read, Nora Hale. She was in her mid-40s, average height, sandy blonde hair pulled into a tight bun face, lined not by age but by a kind of habitual attentiveness. Her eyes took in Margaret's posture, the puppy's shaking Claire's rigid grip, and Daniel's quiet presence in a single sweep. She did not ask questions. She didn't need to ask. "Let's get you warm," Nora said, voice gentle but efficient, already reaching for blankets. She glanced once at Max, noting his stance, then nodded slightly. "He's trained." "Yes, ma'am," Daniel replied, the words automatic. Margaret was guided into an exam room, her steps small and uneven. Up close, Daniel could see the exhaustion carved into her features. Her skin was thin and almost translucent in the harsh light freckles, faded into a map of years spent outdoors. Her eyes were a pale, watery blue that struggled to stay focused, drifting as if the room were sliding past her rather than the other way around. She murmured about the wind, then asked where she was, then asked again a minute later. Each time Claire answered patiently, her voice steady, even as her hands betrayed her fingers, flexing and unclenching as sensation returned. The puppy was placed on a warming pad nearby. Claire finally loosened the blanket enough for the staff to examine him. He was a German shepherd pup, black and tan, no more than 5 or 6 weeks old. His ears were still folded, muzzle too large for his head paws, oversized, with the promise of what he would become if he survived. His ribs were visible, his belly hollow, but his heart beat strong beneath the vet's gentle touch. "Cold and underfed," Nora said after a moment, allowing herself a small smile. "But stubborn. That helps." The puppy let out a thin squeak when the warmth seeped in, then relaxed enough to stretch one paw before curling again. Claire's shoulders dropped a fraction. "His name is Scout," she said quietly, as if saying it too loudly might break something. The doctor entered next. Dr. Samuel Price was in his late 50s, thin with wire-frame glasses and graying hair combed carefully to one side. His movements were unhurried, his voice even the kind that didn't rush bad news or soften it beyond recognition. He checked Margaret's vitals, his hands sure and practiced. "Mild hypothermia," he said. "Dehydrated. We can stabilize her tonight." Margaret nodded, then frowned. "Am I late?" she asked, anxiety flickering across her face. "No, Mom," Claire said quickly, smoothing a strand of silver hair back from her mother's temple. "You're fine." Dr. Price met Daniel's eyes briefly, understanding passing between them without words. They moved to the waiting area while Margaret rested. Snow tapped softly against the windows, the storm now reduced to a presence rather than a threat. Max lay near the door, body angled outward, ears relaxed but alert. Scout slept on the warming pad, breathing finally steady. For a few minutes, no one spoke. Then Claire did. Her voice was low-measured, as if choosing each word carefully. She was 28, but fatigue had aged her in ways time alone could not. Up close, Daniel noticed faint bruising along her forearm, yellowed at the edges, and the way she flinched when a chair scraped somewhere down the hall. "We didn't plan to be out there," she said. "I thought we could make it before dark." She swallowed. "My husband drinks a lot. When he's sober, he's quiet, controlling. When he isn't, he's loud." Her jaw tightened. "He told me it was time to make a choice. Said my mother was a problem I should have solved years ago. Nursing home or nothing. I said no." Daniel listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. Claire continued the words, gaining momentum now that they were free. "He said if I left with nothing. No money. No car." He took the phone. I grabbed what I could carry. She glanced toward the exam room. Scout was the last one. The rest of the litter didn't make it. Her voice cracked once, then steadied. "I couldn't leave him." Dr. Price returned a few minutes later. "She'll need a stable place after tonight," he said, nodding toward Margaret. "Warm, quiet, low stress. Walking in weather like that again could be dangerous." Claire nodded, relief and fear tangled together. "I know," she said. "I just don't know where." Daniel felt the weight settle fully, then. He reached into the inner pocket of his leather jacket and touched the folded papers there without looking. The inheritance notice. The cabin. He glanced at Max, who lifted his head, and met Daniel's gaze, steady and familiar. Then Daniel looked back at Claire, at Scout sleeping in borrowed warmth at the hallway where Margaret rested fragile and confused but alive. "I have a place," Daniel said. The words were simple, unadorned. Claire looked up, startled. "It's not far," he added. "Empty. Needs heat, but it's solid." He did not offer details. He did not promise safety or solutions. He simply stated what existed. For a moment, Claire searched his face for hesitation and found none. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, quieter now. Max settled back down by the door. Scout slept on, unaware that a line had just been crossed, one that could not be uncrossed again. Snow clung to the trees as the cabin emerged from the forest, its roof bowed under winter's weight, its windows dark and unwelcoming after years of silence. Daniel Walker cut the engine and sat still for a moment, hands resting on the wheel, as if the decision to stop here needed one last confirmation. The cabin had belonged to his uncle, a man who spoke little and worked steadily, someone who believed a place earned its worth by the lives it sheltered, rather than the years it stood empty. Daniel stepped out, first boots sinking into packed snow, his leather jacket stiff with cold. Max jumped down beside him, posture alert, but unhurried, his presence grounding in a way Daniel had come to rely on. Claire helped Margaret out carefully, one arm firm around her mother's shoulders, while the other kept Scout tucked beneath her coat. Margaret's breathing was shallow, but steadier now, her eyes unfocused, yet calm, as if exhaustion had pushed fear aside for the moment. The front door resisted at first, swollen with years of cold and neglect. Daniel leaned into it, shoulder set, and the latch finally gave with a dull crack. Cold air spilled out, stale and sharp, carrying the scent of dust old pine and something faintly familiar that tightened Daniel's chest. Inside the cabin was dim frost, tracing the edges of the windows. Furniture sat where it had been left, a table scarred by use chairs, pulled slightly askew, everything coated in a thin layer of gray dust. It felt less abandoned than paused, as if the house had been holding its breath. "I'll get the fire," Daniel said quietly, moving on instinct more than memory. He stacked logs in the stone hearth, struck a match, and watched the flame catch slowly, reluctantly, before climbing. The sound of it settling into place was a long exhale. Warmth crept back inch by inch, changing the air, softening the edges of the room. Max moved ahead, checking corners, sniffing door frames and baseboards with deliberate thoroughness, before circling once and lying down near the hearth, positioning himself so he could see both the entrance and the people gathered by the fire. Claire settled Margaret into a chair close to the heat, kneeling to adjust the blanket around her shoulders. Up close, Margaret looked smaller than ever, her frame, narrow shoulders, sloped silver hair falling loose around her face. Her skin, pale and finely lined, seemed almost translucent in the firelight. She watched the flames with quiet curiosity, hands hovering as if unsure what to do with them. Scout stirred, letting out a small sound, then relaxed again as warmth reached him. Claire's face softened for the first time since Daniel had met her, tension easing from her jaw as she listened to the puppy's breathing even out. Margaret's gaze drifted across the room, then fixed on something in the corner. A large wooden frame stood partially draped with cloth, its beams darkened and polished smooth by years of use. A loom. Margaret rose without being told, her movements slow but purposeful. Claire started to reach for her, then stopped, sensing something different in her mother's posture. Margaret's fingers brushed the wood, tracing the grain with quiet certainty. Her eyes closed briefly, her breath hitching, as if a door had been opened somewhere deep inside. "I remember this," she murmured, voice thin but sure. Daniel froze, a memory surfacing uninvited. His uncle standing by the window on winter afternoons, the steady clack of the loom filling the cabin when words were unnecessary. Margaret adjusted the bench and sat, her hands shaking at first as she touched the shuttle. The movement was awkward, tentative, but then it steadied. She began to weave, slow, careful, each pass deliberate as if the loom itself were guiding her. Claire covered her mouth, emotion flickering across her face. Relief and grief tangled together. Scout woke fully, then lifting his head and wobbling to his feet. He toddled across the floor on unsteady legs toward Max, drawn by warmth and instinct. Max did not move. He watched the puppy approach, eyes, soft body, relaxed. Scout sniffed Max's paw, then leaned clumsily into the larger dog's chest and collapsed. Max shifted slightly to accommodate him, allowing the contact without correction. Daniel watched from across the room, something loosening in his chest. Max did not teach. He did not command. He simply existed as an example of calm strength. Daniel turned his attention to the cabin itself. He patched a draft along one window with an old cloth he found in a drawer, swept the floor near the door, and carried in more firewood. Outside, he climbed onto the porch roof to secure loose shingles, his breath fogging as he worked. The physical labor felt familiar, grounding a language his body understood even when his thoughts lagged behind. Each task stretched time forward 1 hour, blending into the next, the idea of leaving growing more distant with every small repair. Inside the loom's quiet rhythm filled the space, a sound that seemed to stitch the room back together. Margaret's shoulders relaxed as she worked, her breathing evening out. She did not speak much, but when she did, her words were clear. She commented on the tension of the thread, the way the fabric was taking shape. Claire listened, careful not to interrupt, her eyes shining, as she recognized pieces of the woman her mother had been. Scout slept at Margaret's feet now, his small body rising and falling in steady rhythm. As evening settled, the cabin transformed. Shadows softened. The air warmed. Dust motes drifted like slow snow in the firelight. Daniel wiped down the table, set out simple food from what he had brought, and watched as Claire moved through the space with growing ease, hanging damp clothes near the hearth, conserving energy, but no longer braced for disaster. Max remained near the fire, watchful but content. Daniel sat back in a chair at last, muscles loosening, and looked around. The cabin was no longer just a structure he needed to secure and abandon. It held breath, movement, sound. It held people. He realized with a quiet certainty that he had crossed another line, one he did not yet understand, but could already feel the weight of. The cabin that had stood empty for years was no longer empty, and something inside him was beginning to wake with it. Late afternoon light thinned beneath a low Montana sky clouds, pressing close as if the forest were holding its breath. Daniel Walker was splitting wood behind the cabin when Max lifted his head ears, angling forward with sudden focus. The sound came next, distant but unmistakable tires grinding against gravel, where no one had driven since the storm passed. Daniel set the axe down slowly, muscles tightening, the old awareness rising without effort. Inside the cabin, the loom went quiet. Margaret stiffened in her chair, confusion giving way to a flicker of recognition that unsettled her breathing. Claire felt it too, her shoulders drawing inward, her hand instinctively finding Scout and pulling the puppy closer against her chest. The truck stopped hard near the porch. A man climbed out, movements sharp and impatient. Ethan Miller was in his late 30s, tall and broad through the shoulders, but worn down by years of poor choices. His face was angular in a harsh way, cheekbones sharp beneath sallow skin, eyes restless and bloodshot, as if sleep had long stopped visiting him regularly. A patchy beard clung to his jaw, untrimmed, more neglect than style. His jacket was too thin for the cold, stained at the cuffs, and his boots tracked mud and slush with careless entitlement. He walked toward the cabin, as if it already belonged to him. Claire Ethan shouted, his voice cutting through the trees. "I know you're in there." Margaret rose halfway from her chair, panic flooding her expression. Her hands shook, eyes darting her breath, turning shallow and fast. "Who is that?" she whispered, fear replacing confusion in an instant. Scout whimpered, his small body trembling against Claire's arm. Claire swallowed hard, forcing herself to stand between her mother and the door. Her face had gone pale, but her spine straightened, a line she had learned to draw after too many nights of shouting. Daniel stepped onto the porch before Ethan reached the steps. He stood tall, leather jacket pulled tight against the cold boots planted squarely, his expression calm but unreadable. Max moved with him, positioning himself directly in front of the door. The German shepherd stood solid and unmoving, black and tan coat, bristling slightly in the wind, eyes locked on Ethan with quiet authority. He did not growl. He did not bare his teeth. He simply existed as an immovable boundary. Ethan laughed sharply when he saw the dog. "You hiding behind a dog now?" He sneered, eyes flicking past Daniel toward the cabin interior. "Where's my wife? You need to leave," Daniel said, voice low and even. He did not raise it. He did not threaten. The words carried weight because they were not inflated. Ethan stepped closer, invading space out of habit. "You don't get to tell me anything. You think I don't know what this looks like." He gestured wildly toward the cabin. "You drag women up into the woods playing hero. You think that'll hold up when the cops show?" Claire's voice broke the tension, shaking but steady. "Stop." She stepped forward despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm here because I choose to be." Ethan spun on her. "You walked out, took my money, took my mother-in-law like she's some prize." His eyes burned with accusation. "This guy's got you brainwashed." "That's enough," Daniel said. Ethan leaned in, breath sour with old alcohol. "Or what?" "You'll shoot me. That's what you SEAL types do." Before Daniel could respond, the distant wail of sirens cut through the trees. The sound froze Ethan mid-sentence. His head snapped toward the road, color draining from his face. "You called them," he snapped. "No," Daniel replied calmly. "Someone else did." 2 patrol vehicles arrived moments later, red and blue lights flashing against the snow-dusted pines. The officers stepped out with controlled caution. The older deputy introduced himself as Deputy Harris, mid-40s, square build, graying hair beneath his hat eyes, steady with the confidence of long experience. His partner, Officer Lane, was younger, lean movements, sharp and observant, scanning the scene without escalating it. "We got a welfare call," Harris said evenly. "Mind telling us what's going on?" Ethan launched into his version immediately, words tumbling over one another, accusations heavy and unbalanced. He spoke of abandonment, theft, manipulation. Daniel listened without interruption. Max remained still, positioned between Margaret and the open doorway, blocking the worst of the wind without crowding her. When Harris turned to Claire, she took a breath and spoke clearly. "I'm here by choice. My mother is here by choice. We are not being held." Margaret hesitated, then nodded, clutching Scout tighter. Her voice, when it came, was thin, but unmistakably firm. "I stay," she said. The simplicity of it settled something in the air. Officer Lane crouched slightly to meet Margaret's eye level. "Ma'am, are you safe here?" Margaret nodded again. "It's warm," she added, as if that explained everything. Daniel handed Harris a folded packet. "Medical records from the clinic." Harris scanned them, then looked back at Ethan. "Sir, we're going to need you to lower your voice." Ethan bristled. "This is my family." "Not anymore," Claire said quietly, meeting his eyes. Something in Ethan cracked. He cursed, threw his hands up, anger spilling outward when it could no longer land. Harris's voice hardened just enough. "You're leaving." Ethan stormed off the porch, boots slipping on thawing snow. The patrol cars followed him down the drive until the forest swallowed the sound. Silence returned slowly, the kind that came after danger passed, but the body hadn't caught up yet. Margaret's breathing eased. Scout stopped trembling and pressed his nose into Claire's coat. Max stepped back, returning to his place near the hearth, as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. That night, Daniel sat alone by the fire flames, reflecting in his eyes. The cabin was quiet again, but it was a different quiet now, layered with choice rather than fear. He thought about the road, the paperwork waiting the easy option of leaving once things settled. He understood with sharp clarity that if he walked away now, he would be turning his back on the very line he had drawn with his own body at the door. Staying was no longer kindness. It was conviction. Spring arrived quietly in the Montana mountains, snow retreating from the porch, and the narrow path between the pines as light lingered longer each evening. Daniel Walker noticed the change first in the mornings. The cold still bit, but it no longer ruled. He stepped onto the porch with a mug warming his hands, leather jacket creasing at the elbows, as he leaned against the railing and watched meltwater drip steadily from the eaves. His beard had grown slightly uneven again, flecked with gray, his face still carved by old vigilance, but the tightness in his jaw had softened. For years, mornings had been about departure times and exit routes. Here they had become about staying long enough to see what came next. Inside the cabin, the loom worked most days. Margaret sat straighter now, her narrow shoulders no longer caving inward as they had during the storm. Her silver hair was brushed back neatly, sometimes braided loosely by Claire, and her pale blue eyes focused best when her hands were busy. She did not weave for hours at a time, only when her strength allowed, but when she worked, something steadied inside her. The blankets took shape, slowly, thick and warm, their colors muted and practical. People from the nearby town began to stop by, not all at once, not loudly. They brought wool, asked questions, stayed for coffee. Margaret greeted them kindly, whether she remembered their names or not. "Sit," she would say. "You'll be warmer." Claire found work at a small grocery in town, stocking shelves in the mornings, and learning the rhythm of a life that did not require constant vigilance. She still carried herself with caution, tall and slim dark hair tied back neatly now, but the tension in her shoulders eased with each passing week. Her skin had regained color, the windburn fading her eyes, lifting more often to meet others without fear. She returned to the cabin each afternoon with stories about customers and quiet pride in earning her own way again. At night she sat near the hearth, mending clothes, or watching her mother's hands move across the loom, allowing herself moments of stillness she had once believed were dangerous. Scout grew quickly. The German Shepherd puppy's ribs disappeared beneath a glossy black and tan coat, his oversized paws finally beginning to match the rest of him. His ears lifted one at a time, crooked and determined, his curiosity expanding with the world. He followed Margaret from room to room and slept curled against her chair, whining softly if she forgot him, even for a moment. She called him her anchor, a word she used when names slipped away. When memory drifted, Scout remained. Max accepted the puppy's presence without ceremony. He allowed Scout to climb clumsily over his paws and press into his chest by the fire. At night, the two dogs slept side by side, one seasoned by years of discipline, the other just learning what safety felt like. Max remained watchful, his posture unchanged, but there was ease in the way he breathed now, a quiet contentment that mirrored Daniel's own. The cabin itself changed. Shelves filled with folded blankets and skeins of yarn. The unused dining set was replaced with a work table scarred by use. Daniel repaired the fence along the clearing, fixed a sagging step at the clinic without being asked, and stacked firewood higher than necessary because the motion felt right. He worked in silence, not out of distance, but because silence fit this place. Each task tied him more firmly to the ground beneath his boots. The paperwork remained on the desk where he had first placed it. Forms that once felt urgent now seemed strangely irrelevant. Each morning Daniel told himself he would finish them. Each evening he found another reason not to. He sat on the porch steps with Max beside him, watching Scout tumble across the board strip and try again. Margaret's laughter drifted through the open door, soft but real. Daniel closed his eyes and let the sound settle. One afternoon, a woman from town stopped by with a bag of wool and an envelope. She was middle-aged, bundled against the lingering chill, her manner practical and kind. "People are asking," she said simply, "about the blankets." Daniel nodded and took the envelope without comment, passing it to Claire. The orders were modest but steady. The cabin became something more than shelter. It became a point of connection, a place where time moved at a human pace again. Daniel understood the truth one quiet evening as he sat alone by the fire. The flames reflected in his eyes, the room warm and alive behind him. He thought about the road, the ease of leaving once the worst had passed, the habit of walking away before roots could form. For years, home had been a place he survived away from, a memory too sharp to touch. Now it was here, in the steady clack of a loom, in a puppy asleep against his boot, in the simple decision to stay when no one asked him to. When Claire joined him on the porch, she did not speak at first. She sat beside him, the boards cool beneath them, the sky shifting from blue to gold. "You don't have to," she said eventually, her voice gentle, as if offering him a way out he no longer needed. "I know," Daniel replied. She nodded, satisfied. "Still glad you are." Inside, Margaret folded a finished blanket with care. She ran her hand across it once, then twice, and smiled. "This one's good," she said. "Someone will need it." Scout lifted his head at the sound of her voice, then settled again, warm and certain. Max stretched near the hearth and closed his eyes. Daniel did not sign the papers. He placed them back in his jacket pocket and left them there. Staying was not an act of duty or heroism. It was choice. The kind made quietly without witnesses when leaving would have been easier. As night settled, and the cabin held against the lingering cold, Daniel felt something settle at last. He was here not because he had to be, but because he had decided not to go. And that he understood now was what made a home. Sometimes the miracles we wait for do not arrive with thunder signs or sudden rescue. They arrive quietly in the form of a door that stays open, a fire that is kept burning, or a hand that chooses not to let go when walking away would be easier. God doesn't always remove the storm from our path. Often He places the right people under the same roof until the storm passes. In everyday life, we are given small moments to choose compassion over comfort, presence over distance, and faith over fear. Those choices may seem ordinary, but they are often how God does His most meaningful work. If this story touched your heart, consider sharing it with someone who might need a reminder that hope still lives in quiet places. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if these stories bring peace to your life, subscribe to the channel. May God bless you, keep you safe, and guide your steps wherever your road leads.